What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Embodied Podcast with Elizabeth D'Alto. This is episode number 7 of 8 in a series about self-love. What I have gone through in the first 6 episodes was like a little overview in episode 1, and then dedicated an episode each to the 5 parts of my Embodied Self-Love Framework. First, we did self-awareness, then self-knowledge, self-acceptance, self-trust, and self-knowledge. This episode is actually kind of a bonus because it's about boundaries, which are not part of the framework, but are absolutely part of self-love. And boundaries are also a place where we get to fully integrate and express all the other steps in the framework. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to approach boundaries from a couple different ways. If you are watching here on YouTube, you could see I'm not in my own home. I'm at a friend's place. So I picked the most beautiful wall in all of the house, this bright yellow wall with this beautiful art behind me. I'm also holding my microphone again like a talk show host. Which I actually kind of love, but I know the sound is good. I tested it out, so we should be good to go on all those fronts. I am going to pull up my notes per usual so that I could stay on track for what I want to share with you. Basically, I'm going to get into boundaries from a couple different perspectives in the episode. Boundaries with yourself, how we teach people how to treat us, boundaries specifically that revolve around yeses and nos, like what we say yes to, what we say no to, how to deal with boundary violations, boundary enforcement, and then energetic boundaries. Now, I do want to remind you that I am running the Embodied Self-Love mini course either on its own or inside of the Embodied Living Center. And you can get all the details to that by visiting wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. If you have been resonating with the series, or even if this one episode really resonates with you, I highly recommend taking the mini course because, to be quite honest, the workshop that I dedicate to boundaries will be worth the investment of the entire thing. Boundaries is something I've been teaching on for over 7 years now. I get notes from people all the time thanking me for how I model boundaries. This is a really crucial thing in my healing sessions with clients, in my group programs. It's just something that I love teaching. I'm naturally built for, your Virgo friend over here who loves discernment. I am uniquely equipped to help people out with their boundaries. So if this is something that you struggle with, this episode is going to be great. You're going to get a lot of good nuggets here. But if you need the deeper help, and if you also want to access me, get some Q&A time, the mini course is a no-brainer, okay? wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. So let's dive into, I'm going to be talking about boundaries today from an embodied perspective. So boundaries, by my definition, are a responsible way of engaging with what you can actually control in a healthy, useful way. I saw a funny meme this week that was talking about spiritual bypass and all these things that like spiritual people will say to people at inappropriate times. And focus on what you can control is one of those things. So I'm not talking about using this as a spiritual bypass. I'm talking about when so much is going on in your life and in your world. For example, it's September 2020. We are still in COVID times. So there's a lot of things that are out of our control right now that maybe have been at other times. And so in order to not feel super stressed, super anxious, and even more disoriented than these times are already making a lot of us feel, by identifying what you can control and interacting with it in a way that's like nourishing and generative for you, that is honoring and considerate of your energy and where you are right now, what you have to give and what you don't, which again is likely very different if you're listening to this in real time. In all of my private client sessions and in all of my Q&As in my programs and in the Embodied Self-Love mini course that I've had so far, people are showing up. They're just different. People are different right now, depleted in a lot of ways. I myself, my energy was lower. In the month of August, I had like the lowest energy that I've had in years. And I'm usually someone with so like boundless energy. And that just was not the case in August. And so it's just super important to understand that boundaries allow you to be your best self. I mean, put very simply, and also help you to set the stage for really beautiful relationships with the people in your life, and as well, how to navigate relationships with difficult people in your life or in circumstances where you don't really have a choice. You know, like sometimes at our jobs, sometimes in our families, we can't just like cut people off, or we can't just cut people out. And so we need some boundaries for how to navigate having to interact with people that maybe in any other circumstance we would not choose to. But in this particular one, it just is what it is. Boundaries also evolve over time. So when you first start setting boundaries, which I imagine people listening to this have an array of experience with boundaries. So it's not just that like maybe you're new to boundaries altogether. Maybe you're new at setting boundaries in a specific context in your life. You know, like I had been setting boundaries with my family for years. Applying boundaries in romantic relationships and business are something that came later for me. So situational might be for you as well. But eventually, your boundaries can be both rock solid and don't require you to be militant or rigid about it. But in the beginning, you might be. That's kind of just a normal phase for people, and it's okay. Ultimately, though, real boundaries are kind. And here's why, when you start setting boundaries with people who don't have them, and some of you might have had this experience before, when we set boundaries with people who don't have their own, they'll often be defensive, or they'll tell us we're being mean or selfish or things like this. And here's why none of those things are true. When we take the time to set boundaries, we are being honest. We're being honest with both ourselves and other people. So boundaries are an expression of integrity. Boundaries are an expression of alignment. And they also change over time, right? Because where I need a boundary today, I might not need a boundary 3 months from now. Things are different. And I'll give you an example on that, because I right now am in a phase where work is my top priority. I have several creative projects going on now. So some of my friends who are great, lovely people, I've had to set some boundaries with them around how much they can expect to hear from me or my response times on things, because I'm really in the creative zone right now. And that's where I need to be in this season of my life through the middle of October. So boundaries also are not always about dealing with a negative or an unpleasant situation. Boundaries are energy work. Boundaries are energy management. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I get to energetic boundaries. And I don't just mean in the energetic field, but like literally your energy, your vitality. And day in and day out, that is up and down. That can be finite. It always replenishes itself, but we have to really respect what we have in the tank. Boundaries let us do that. When we're not boundaried, we tend to be people-pleasing. We tend to overextend ourselves, and that results in resentment, depletion, burnout, unsatisfying relationships. And, in the most extreme cases, it can result in illness, literal illness. Do you know how many people get things like adrenal fatigue because they don't have boundaries? And so it's really, really important to just know in your heart that boundaries are kind and considerate. They're one of the most loving things that you can do for yourself. And how anyone else responds to your boundaries is not an indication of whether or not it's okay to have them. I was reading something recently, a colleague of mine who used to be a client of mine was creating a program or a class or something around boundaries. And she had written something about, if your boundaries are intimidating to other people, maybe they're harsh. And I didn't comment on her post, but I really disagree with that, because, again, what I said earlier, we might be a little rigid or harsh with our boundaries in the beginning, and that is ours to own. But also, some people are intimidated by boundaries, again, because they don't have them, because they don't know how to say no, because they're not comfortable saying no. And so it just strikes them as so foreign and so rude or abrasive. But that's their own context, right? Like that has nothing to do with you. So the answer to that is yes and no. Like, can we be intimidating and harsh in our boundaries? Of course we can. But also, will some people take it that way when that's not what we're doing? Also true. So I want to start by talking about having boundaries with yourself. But actually, there's one more thing I wanted to say about boundaries being kind. One of the reasons why boundaries are kind is because lying is unkind. And when we don't have boundaries fairly often, we are lying, sometimes to ourselves and sometimes to other people, about either our capacity, our willingness, or our desire to do things or to show up or to take on tasks or responsibilities or roles that really don't work for us, aren't appropriate for us. I'll talk about this a little later in the episode, but a lot of things when it comes to boundaries fall under what I call the category of just because I can doesn't mean I should. And so one of the things that makes boundaries super kind is how often we have needed to have them and how often we've stuffed what we actually need and instead sacrificed ourselves, said yes to things when we really meant no. And the thing with that is when you show up to something where you don't really want to be there or you don't really want to be doing the thing that you said you would do, you're not bringing your best energy anyway. So it's less kind to show up begrudgingly, resentfully, or half-heartedly than it is to say no and allow someone to find a person who could show up fully. All right? So it's just more authentic. It's more genuine. It's more considerate. It's more compassionate. It's more loving for everyone involved to have boundaries because they are honest. Okay? So boundaries with yourself is the literal implementation and integration of the entire self-love framework that we've talked about in this series. Again, self-awareness, self-knowledge, self-acceptance, self-trust, and self-knowledge. Use your values and your priorities, which we talked about in self-knowledge in that episode, I believe, to determine your boundaries. Also, use through self-knowledge and self-acceptance and self-awareness what you know is and isn't okay with you based on how it feels and how it impacts you. And let me give you a couple examples of this. So about a month ago, maybe a little longer than that, I literally unfollowed everyone I was following on social media and I started from scratch. And when I say on social media, I mean Instagram. That's where I spend most of my social media time. Because one of the things I noticed is even though you can mute people, even though you can choose who you're following, when you log into Instagram, there's always going to be a post that you see. Even if I'm just logging Instagram to like check my own notifications and my own DMs to interact with my own people, there's something's going to pop up and I'm going to see it. And if the thing that pops up is something that's going to distract me or derail me from what I was focused on in any way, that is not serving me. So this was me enforcing a boundary with myself to be very careful and protective and extra intentional with my energy during this creative phase that I'm in, so I really don't get pulled out of what I need to be doing because I have full client load. I'm teaching the Power year-long program. I have the classes that I stream every week in the Embodied Living Center. I knew I was going to be teaching this Embodied Self-Love mini course, creating these podcast episodes. I work a full schedule, Monday through Friday. I'm doing stuff. I have deadlines I need to hit. We're also updating the website. So this is a time when it's super important for me to be focused. So I unfollowed everyone on social media, and the only things I refollowed or followed anew were things that would either uplift me, bring me joy, or fill me with awe and wonder. beautiful things. So I followed some National Geographic photographers of the types of animals I like, some ocean accounts, several accounts of Puerto Rico, which is where half my family is from, and I can't wait. That's the first place I'm dying to travel when the pandemic is over. Spain, which is my favorite country. Flowers, so many flowers. Plants, plant accounts, outdoor gardening accounts. So literally anytime I log into Instagram now, the only thing I'm ever going to see is something that none of it is going to distract my mind or get me thinking about something I don't need to be thinking about in that moment. It's only going to be things that delight or excite me, because that's what I needed. That was a boundary with myself right now. Okay, because I don't have the kind of mind. My mind is too active and too analytical to see something and be like, oh, I'll think about that later. It'll be like, nope, now I'm in and I'm distracted. Couldn't even have it in my face at all. Then there's also things, some examples you might relate to, things like food. You know, some people have food allergies or food sensitivities, or some people have what my friend Jill calls trigger foods, right? Like if it's in your house, you're going to eat the whole bag or you're going to eat the whole box. So that's a boundary with myself. There's certain things I don't keep in my house. I enjoy them, but I know that I don't really have the best willpower or self-control around that thing. Best to just not have it in my house and not put myself in a position to have a bellyache or to like have my energy crash later because I ate a whole box of crackers or something, you know? So, and then dating is another great example. Some of us, if you've ever listened to my podcast episodes with Eva Clay or Ken Page on deeper dating, you know, some of us are really, we can be attracted to things that aren't good for us. And so having boundaries with ourselves of being like, listen, I know that like this archetype of person is just, you know, it never goes well. So again, sometimes it's fine to engage or indulge, but other times it's like, I gotta take care of myself. And I like to call it not being distracted. I saw that on a meme. I can't take credit for it. Saw that many years ago. I don't remember where it came from, but I love saying it. No more distractions. I don't know what the equivalent of that would be for someone who isn't into dick. So feel free to make that up and then let me know what you decide it's called. But that works perfectly. So, you know, we have to have boundaries with ourselves. This is about respect. Ultimately, it's about love. Boundaries with yourself help you to navigate. I said this earlier, like the vast space of all the things that fall under the category of just because you can doesn't mean you should. I'll give you more examples. I'm loading you up on examples. I actually am a real ambivert, right? Introverted and extroverted. Socially, so professionally, very extroverted. Put me on a stage. I love running groups, things like that all day long, right? I love going to events, meeting people, fine. Socially though, I am not that way. I'd much rather a small group, unless it's like salsa dancing or something like that. But so if I get invited to parties or events or social gatherings, the first thing I am asking is who else is going? Who's going to be there? Because personally for me, I had too many experiences many years ago when I was living in San Diego of showing up to stuff. There were a lot of people in the community where I lived who did not resonate for me. And I was like, listen, if so-and-so is going to be there, I'm not going. Depending on the environment, the venue, what it was going to be, not going. Because I just know better for myself, right? So knowing the types of events you like to go to, certain types of people. I'm not really a drug person. I know some of you saw my Instagram post, although I did accidentally end up doing mushrooms last week. I ate the wrong piece of chocolate in my friend's refrigerator. I will tell you that story someday, I promise, but not today. And, but so that's not really my thing. So for example, if I get invited to a party by someone who I know people are always going to be like hi or like tripping on something or whatever, I'm not going to go to that party. This is why I've never gone to Burning Man. Like, it's just not for me. I don't need to put it down. I don't need to disparage it. I just know myself and I respect myself that I'm not going to have a good time. So there's no reason for me to go. Okay. Another example, this podcast, going solo. A lot of people love our podcast interviews. I've done over 300 interviews over the years. I don't want to do them anymore for a variety of reasons, so I'm not. That might be disappointing to some of you listeners. It's certainly disappointing to like the hordes of potential guests that we still get pitches every week, numerous pitches and we say, no, we're not interviewing anymore. But it brings me so much joy and alignment. It feels so good. So it's an incredible boundary to have. And so not making exceptions, not compromising your values, your standards, your desires, or just whatever your energetic needs are, or your needs to keep you focused and engaged with the things that are top priority to you in the moment. These are important things to have boundaries around. I'm thinking about right now, a lot of you who are parents who are having to navigate schooling your children from home for the beginning of the 2020 school year here. And there's probably a lot of boundaries that you have to have in place to make sure that you have the time, energy, and attention to give to your children so that they could get what they need to get out of their schooling right now. And then there probably have been boundaries that you've had in the past with your kids around like device usage, for example. And now they have to be on the device all freaking day for school in some cases. So again, this is one of those things where values and priorities, depending on what's going on in your life, depending on the times, you will adjust boundaries, reset them, depending on what's going on. So let's dig into how we teach people how to treat us through boundaries. One of the amazing things about having boundaries is that automatically makes you a role model for others. And it's not like we're out here trying to be like all condescending, like trying to teach boundaries to everyone who needs them, the boundaryless masses, which is a lot of people. But what's cool is as we set our own, as we practice having our own boundaries, people automatically, it's being modeled for others. And people get to respect our boundaries or not. I'll talk about what to do when they're not respecting them in a little bit. But also for a lot of people, it gives them permission and awareness that, hey, they could do this too, which is kind of a cool bonus. I was seeing someone last summer. His name was Johnny. And I remember when he asked me if he could call me Liz. And I said, no, I prefer Elizabeth. He said, well, I mean, I don't like being called Johnny. And I was like, okay, then why don't you tell people not to call you Johnny? It had literally never occurred to him that he could tell people he does not like being called this name they call him. He was kind of just like, I mean, it's just what people do. And I'm like, you just have to say no or just ask them not to. It was quite fascinating because to me, it wouldn't occur to me to not let someone know that. And to him, it didn't occur to him to let someone know that. But this is just an example of how none of us ever have to tolerate treatment that isn't okay with us, from very simple things to people not getting our names right to more complex things. Consent is a boundary. Checking in with yourself, taking your time, slowing down, not rushing into decisions, not rushing for anything, not complying with cultural norms or standards or other people's timelines to just make them comfortable or be accommodating. All of these things are ways in which we teach people how to treat us. So I remember in 2012 when I really started doing this work, the person I had to set the most boundaries with at the time was my mom. And she would get really upset sometimes. And I didn't live, as close by. My dad and my brother lived in the same house with her. And sometimes I would get calls from either of them. My family loves to do triangulation. And, they'd be like, can you just give her a call? Can you apologize? Da, da, da. Basically, they were trying to enlist me in smoothing out the ramification of me setting a boundary. And my answer was no. Like, it's going to take some time. It's going to be an adjustment, but this is the whole point. I am not okay with something and I have spoken up about it. And now we all get to work together and figure out how do we land in a place that's best for all of us, right? But having boundaries is about no longer just appeasing or accommodating other people or, folding yourself into positions that mitigate or alleviate other people's discomforts, other people's codependencies, other people's trauma bonds, other people's non-boundaries, right? So let's get into the no's and the yeses. Having boundaries is literally one of the expressions of boundaries is as simple as saying no when you mean no and saying yes when you mean yes. This in and of itself is a radical act of self-love. And it's not only self-loving because you're honoring what you really want and what you don't want, or what you need and what is not good for you. But energetically, spiritually, karmically, again, it's honest. You're not lying. So the talk that I gave at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which is the talk that inspired this whole podcast series many years ago, was called Untamed Self-Love. It's the first time I taught the framework. It was in a little bit different of an order. I've tweaked it since then. But that was a big deal for me to give that talk. It was at Lincoln Center in New York City. I'm a native New Yorker. It was the biggest venue I'd ever spoken on. And also Lincoln Center is quite iconic. It was in a smaller section called Jazz, but it was still a really big deal for me. I was on the program with these other like really big names like Chris Guillebeau, Jonathan Fields, Andrew Weil, and then it was like me. So it was a big deal. My family lives close by, so they were able to come see. Had a couple of friends and Wild Soul women in the audience too. And it was just, being in New York. I love New York so much. And so I had just come back from this big travel experience, and I had bought these new gold hoop earrings. They were kind of like a reward to myself for going through and getting through some really big things that year. And so I was so excited. The first time I was going to wear my hoop earrings was going to be for my talk. They were beautiful. And the audio guy, the tech guy, was putting on the mic for me. And he was like, I think these earrings are going to be a problem. Would you mind taking them off? And I was like, yeah, I actually really mind. I need you to figure it out. And it was funny. I told that story when I was on stage, but like the hoop earrings are such a part of who I am. And those particular hoop earrings they were very symbolic for me. And so there was no way I was going to step out on that stage without wearing my earrings. And even that, like, it might sound silly. Some people listening might be like, why didn't you just take off the damn earrings? But I didn't want to. That's the answer. I didn't want to, and so I didn't have to. And I looked at the guy and I was like, I trust you to figure it out. These earrings are actually really important to me. And he figured it out. All right. So stuff like that. Saying no to someone else is saying yes to yourself. I don't remember where I originally heard that. I don't know whose quote that is. I didn't make it up. So please, if you share that, if you're like, oh, that's a truth bomb, if you share that on Instagram, don't quote me. It's not mine. You could put anonymous. But saying no to someone else is saying yes to yourself, right? It allows you to see the benefit, right? Because sometimes we feel bad about saying no to other people. But I want to come back to boundaries being kind. One of my biggest goals, and I'm going to get into this, I'm going to teach this more in the mini course, actually the mechanics of setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries around like what to say and how to say it. If the energy around your no is kind and loving and compassionate for both yourself and the other person, the no doesn't feel harsh. Like one of my goals is always that my no's feel just as good as my yeses, or almost as good, right? So fairly often, people will invite me to do things that I just don't have the bandwidth for. And I'll be like, thank you so much for thinking of me. I don't have the bandwidth for that right now, but good luck with it. That's a good ass feeling. No. If I was all like frazzled. So here's another cool thing about boundaries. When you consistently set boundaries, you're clear, you're less anxious, and you're less stressed. If I was all like frazzled, I used to be this way. Before I got good at boundaries, I would feel like people asking me to do things was like accosting me. I would feel like almost personally attacked when people would ask me to do things sometimes. It would almost be like the nerve of that person to ask me, but like they don't know what's going on with me. They don't know what's going on in my life. But I, in my 20s, was so frazzled at times. That's how it felt. So the other cool thing about having boundaries is like your energy is just so much better. You're so much more regulated. Your nervous system is more regulated because, again, you're just not spreading yourself too thin. So you even have the energy to be kind, to be loving, to be caring, and to be compassionate in your responses to people. And so you do not have to get hooked into other people's dramas and things when you're being kind and compassionate, when you're saying no when you mean no, when you're saying yes when you mean yes. And one thing I always want people to notice is how it feels. Like, I tell people all the time how good it feels to say no to stuff that you don't want to do. Because think about how bad it feels to say yes to things you don't want to do. It's like the minute you say yes, you're like, ugh, right? And if you can't see me because you're listening, not watching, it's like my shoulders caved in, I slumped over. Like, you know the feeling. You know the feeling of getting roped in or guilted into doing something you didn't want to do, or talking yourself into why you should do something. When it comes to boundaries and the yeses and nos, paying attention for the word should is also very helpful. Like, notice when you're telling yourself, I really should do that. Why? Always, 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 always question a should. It might be valid, but a lot of times it's not. So always question a should. So let's talk about boundary violations. And again, I'm kind of giving you like the aerial overview of these things in the mini course workshop that's solely dedicated to boundaries. I'm going much deeper into all these things, especially like the application and the how to do it. Boundary violations and boundary enforcement. Someone invalidating your perspective or your feelings, your experience, that's a boundary violation. A lot of people will do this unknowingly or unconsciously. That doesn't make it okay. It just also doesn't make them the worst person in the world. You know, people don't know what they don't know. And like I said earlier, often people who will do that are people who don't have boundaries themselves. Dumping is a boundary violation. So, we all have friends or people in our lives who we can share things with or we can go to for support. This is why I said earlier that consent is a boundary. I always ask people, or I like to ask people, there are some friends where there's like an open door, like anytime, anything goes. And we've already established that. It's like the established consent. We don't have to check in. But with other people, it's like, hey, do you have a minute? Or do you mind if I share something? And you can just like respond whenever. Or sometimes it'll be like, hey, I don't even need a response. I just need to share this with someone. Are you available for that? The words available and not available are also so helpful when it comes to boundaries. I'm available for that or I'm not available for that. That's a great way to think about it. It's also a great way to communicate it. Because when you say to someone, I can't do that, they might be like, well, why? When you just say I'm not available, who's going to argue? Well, what else do you have going on? People might, and then that's your like you can either explain it or you don't have to. You could just say I'm busy. Right? I'm not available. Doesn't necessarily mean like I'm working, I'm doing this, I have to take my kids. I'm not available could mean like I really want to watch the entire season of, whatever the hell show you're watching right now. It's coming out tomorrow. I want to watch the whole thing. So I have a date with my couch. That's also not being available. So just asking people first. This really, really, really goes for advice, right? Some of you have been with me for a long time now. You know that I am not into unsolicited advice. I'm not into receiving it, and I'm not into giving it, because that's a violation of someone's personhood, right? Assuming that you know better for them than they know for themselves, butting in when they didn't ask you to. The way that I like to handle this is just ask, right? Like if you have an insight for someone or some advice or experience to share, you could just say. And this is consent. I have a thought about that. Do you want it, or were you just venting? Or did you just want to vent? I have a hunch about that. Can I share it? Is now a good time to share? You want me to share it later? Would you rather I keep it to myself? I love it. One of my favorite ways to say that to people is, can I be direct? Or with some of my friends, I'll be like, permission to speak freely. And they're like, yeah, hit me. Right? But you never just dump your advice, your idea, your opinion on someone, because it might not be appropriate, might not be welcome, and it might be really invalidating. And the same with receiving, right? This was one of the big boundaries I had to set with my mom, because she's a mom. Moms are always parenting. It doesn't matter how old you are, right? Some of you are moms, you get that. You want your kids to be safe and taken care of. You have all kinds of opinions on how they're living their lives, how they should and shouldn't, especially once your kids get older. And it's a little more out of your hands. And so I would have to say to her, I'd be like, listen, unless I ask, I don't want to know what you think. I don't want your opinion. If I want your opinion, I will ask for it. There are times when I really do want your opinion. I promise you I will ask. There are times when I really don't, either because I don't have the energy, I don't have the time, or it's just not something that I want to talk to you about. I don't feel comfortable. There's another in setting boundaries. The saying, I don't feel comfortable, is another great phrase. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't feel comfortable you sharing that with me. Like between when you're the child, if you've been the child of parents, again, who do the triangulation thing, who like to talk to you about each other or your siblings or whatever, if you don't want to be participating in that, to just say, hey, it makes me really uncomfortable when you share these things with me, so I really don't want you to anymore. Most of the time, people are not going to like that, but they'll deal with it. You'll figure it out, right? But you say it with kindness, you say it with care, but you say it with firmness too. So again, having boundaries isn't about being rigid and policing people all the time, but you will have to remind people, because here's the thing. If you've lived a lot of your life without boundaries, once you start setting them, it's different. I've interviewed another dear friend of mine, Terry Cole, for the podcast many times over the years. And I remember the second time I had her on, I think it was 2017, we were talking about codependency. And she was talking about all these books by a woman named Harriet Lerner that are called like The Dance of, and then insert thing. And one of them was like The Dance of Anger. And, so for example, the reason why she thinks of it as a dance and boundaries, you could think of boundaries like a dance as well. If you have been functioning without boundaries for a lot of your life, you've kind of been in this dance where there's like specific steps and, you could predict it. You know how it's going to go. My mom is going to say this. I'm going to say this. This is how that's going to go. Happens every time. When you start setting boundaries, you change the step. So right when the person's expecting you to do something, you do something else. That can be very disorienting for people. So again, we don't need to demonize people for not being down with our boundaries. We also don't have to tolerate it either, but we can understand that it's disorienting for them. It's changing the nature of the relationship. It's changing what they're used to. If what they were used to is unhealthy, that's important. That needs to be addressed. And so it is a change for them too, right? It's important for you, but it's a change for them that they weren't ready for, that they didn't ask for, that they weren't expecting. It really throws people off, can be really upsetting to people. But again, we can't not have boundaries because it upsets other people. We get to be grown-ups. We get to use our tools and our skills, our good communication, our courageous conversations, right? Our emotional maturity and intelligence and literacy. And we get to have these uncomfortable conversations that are also vulnerable and courageous, that help foster better intimacy with people. Your boundaries, I'm going to tell you what boundaries are going to do for you that I love about boundaries. It's going to bring in the people closer to you who should be closer. And it's going to repel the people who shouldn't be as close, or maybe even who shouldn't be in your life. Boundaries are incredibly clarifying and cleansing for your relationships. Some relationships you will have to navigate a little bit more and work on a little bit more. And some people it's not. So one of the things I love when I say no to people is when they're like, oh, great, I'm so glad you're taking care of yourself. That feels so good. And that's when you know someone's boundaried, right? When you say no to them and they're like, thank you for taking care of your needs. Yes. That's what I'm saying. So we want to be that person. We want to be the person who, when someone says no to us, we're like, thank you so much. And I want to tell you one more story about that. And then we're going to wrap up the episode. I remember a couple years ago, a friend of mine, I might have told this story somewhere else in this series. I referenced this one a lot because it was just such a good example. At the time, I was pre-recording. I wasn't live streaming all of my Wild Soul Movement videos for my programs. And so I had this expensive camera, this expensive set of mics, tripod, the whole setup. Across all the things, it was probably like $2,000 in equipment. And a friend asked me if she could borrow my equipment to film something. And I said, no. I'm like, to be quite honest, if anything happens, I can't afford to replace it right now. So I really can't, because this is crucial to my livelihood. And she was like, thank you so much. Thank you for saying no. And the other thing she said is, what I love about you is I can trust your yeses. So this is a cool thing to think about with boundaries. When you say no, when you mean no, people also know that they can trust you when you say yes. Because when people are people pleasers, how often do you know, has someone said yes to you and you've been like, that didn't really feel like they really wanted to do it. And then you feel kind of crappy anyway because you could tell that they said yes because they thought they had to, right? So being on the receiving end of that isn't great either. You can feel how the energetics are off of a non-genuine yes or a reluctant yes. But she's like, because you say no, I know that when you say yes, it's like it's a real yes. So that's another cool thing. When you're honest with your boundaries, with your yeses and with your nos, people know they can trust you. People feel safer with you. So the thing I want to wrap up with is energetic boundaries. I'm only going to touch on this. I wanted to introduce it. I'm going to talk about it more in the mini course. Everything that we've talked about so far is boundaries in the sense of interrelational, right? With other people, and then also with our relationship with ourselves. But there's also energetic boundaries. There's like the boundaries of our energetic field, of us as spiritual, emotional, physical, and energetic beings, right? And so energetic boundaries are about attuning through your senses, through your energy, through paying attention to that, to becoming sensitive to that, which a lot of you are already anyway. It's just a matter of refining the sensitivity and the attunement. This is feeling for like where you end and where somebody else begins. If you've ever identified, or if you currently identify as someone who's like intuitive or empathic or highly sensitive, energetic boundaries are so important because it helps you to not be merging or taking on other people's energy all the time. This is something that I'm always working on. I'm always having to work on this. And again, so there's certain environments and places and experiences that I don't go to as much as I can manage not to. Hospitals are really hard for me. Big, like you won't find me at like a march or a protest. That's just too much. That kind of energy is not for me. Knowing these things about ourselves helps us, again, to not put ourselves in positions energetically to compromise ourselves, and also helps us if things are based on our values, like things that people protest about, I stand for, but I have to find other ways to do my own activism, to stand for things, because I'm not going to a protest. Energetic boundaries are also boundaries with our language and our thoughts and our words, because words are spells, right? There's a lot of energy around stuff like that. Energetic boundaries are about being intentional, being conscious with your thoughts, with your language, and in certain spiritual and energetic practices, right? Some of you have heard me talk about or teach about energy hygiene before. We're currently updating all that stuff on the website. Someone actually told me the other day they tried to download the energy hygiene stuff and they couldn't get it. By mid-October, everything will be set and back and we're in good working order on the website. If you're in the Embodied Living Center, though, the energy hygiene practices are in there. So energetic boundaries are about fortifying your energetic field, literally your light energy. We're all light beings as well as human beings. And so the energetic boundaries are about fortifying that. It's not about protecting your energy. It's actually about fortifying and setting your energy in a way so that you don't need to protect yourself. You're inherently protected because your energy is fortified. So we'll get more into that in the mini course as well. But there's a whole book by a woman named Cindy Dale called Energetic Boundaries. That's really good if you want to check that out. So thank you all so much for listening. I hope that was helpful. Next week in the wrap up episode, I will get to the boundaries questions. I did not get to them today. We already ran, we're close to 45 minutes on this. And so I'm going to hang on to the questions for next week. I'll answer those questions. I'll answer any other wrap-up questions that people submit for the series. And then we'll just do a little overview as well. So thank you so much for tuning in for this. The show notes are at untameyourself.com/344. If you want to try the mini course, that's at wildsoulmovement.com/self-love. Share the episode. Subscribe to the podcast, like it on YouTube, leave a comment wherever you're listening or watching or all the things. Let me know what you thought. Shoot me a comment on Instagram. I'm going to be sharing some quotes around the episode, things that we shared. I always want to know what resonated for you. You could always email us at hello@wildsoulmovement.com as well. And that's it. See you later.